Thank you so much, sir. That was really an enlightening experience, especially that monkey story. I could see many faces having smile while he was sharing that monkey story. Okay. So moving towards our other session, before that, I would like to quote by Mary MacLeod Batten. She very rightly said, we have a powerful potential in our youth, and we must have the courage to change old ideas and practices so that we direct their power towards good ends. I would now like to call another speaker, Mr. Ali Naseer, who is serving in JAS as a Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs Management Specialist in Asia Pacific. Mr. Naseer is skilled in building collaborative relationships in developed and emerging markets at the highest level of government and industry, with a proven track record of delivery in Asia Pacific. Today, he will be talking about leadership.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just start off with a caveat. I have a bad cold, so if you can't hear me, apologies, but because I had committed to Jamshed that I'll do this, so I'm going to persevere through this. Hopefully, you should be able to hear me. Just carrying on that theme of change that Hassan talked about, let me just share with you two personal stories, and I'll get into my presentation then. The first is that I'm actually on my fourth career, not fourth job, fourth career. I was a teacher, I was a civil servant, I was then in tobacco for 13 years, and now I've moved to technology. And I think that's partly me, but it's partly the world that you guys are inheriting today. Change has almost become a constant. The day that you signed up in a career or in an organization and you retired from that with a healthy pension is now gone. And I think the more mentally, physically as well, you are attuned to that from day one, the more useful that will be in your lives and careers that pan out ahead of you. So change is almost, Hassan talked about change and transformation. I actually think it's actually, you cannot do anything but not change. And therefore, change isn't a transformation almost, with due respect, Hassan. It's almost something that you have to internalize. And if you're not changing every day, you will cease to be relevant, in my view. The second story is my son is 17 years, and I've had the privilege of having been educated abroad. So the missus this summer said, well, your son's now about to go to college, why don't you guide him? What career should he do, and which college he should go to, and what subjects he should study. So obviously I've been out of university for a while, so I started reading up on a few books, and I have some ideas on what I think he should do. Obviously he has his own interests. But then I accidentally ran into a professor. I was at a course abroad recently, and I ran into a professor of INSEAD. He himself is a guy who's written a number of books on innovation. And so we were talking, and he said, my eldest daughter just went to college in the US. And I said, well, that's great. So, you're a professor of innovation at INSEAD. You've been taught at Harvard Business School. You did your PhD at Stanford. So can you tell me what you told your daughter, what she should study and what profession she should, and he said, so I said, what is she going to do there? He said, well, she was going to major in mathematics and logic. And I started scratching my head. I said, here's the professor of innovation at INSEAD, and he's guided his daughter to go study mathematics and logic. I mean, you hear about ancient Greeks, and that's what they used to do then. I would have thought coding and programming and computer science or genetics, none of that. And he said, Ali, the one thing I've learned is that, and he actually stated a fact, I forget the exact number, maybe George or Hassan might know more about it. He said the speed of change, and I think our friend here talked about technology, is so intense that 25% of the professions as we know today will cease to exist in 10 years' time. So he said the worldview that you might have of saying engineering is a good profession, or medicine is a good profession, or law is a good profession, is from your mindset. And that's going to be irrelevant in 10 years' time. So he said the idea that you, because you're experienced and you can coach and guide your children, is actually gone. Your parents had that luxury, you don't. So I said, well, okay, that's not very great advice, Nathan. What do I tell my wife and my son then? He said, well, two things he thinks is relevant is that whatever is your interest, pursue that. So it's very important now, more so than ever. Mujhe yaad hai when I was much younger, parents used to go, and maybe some of my older colleagues said, ye meri beti doctor banegi, ye mera beta engineer banega, and there's like 6-year-old kids running around. And our professions were almost pre-chosen for us, without regard whatsoever to the individual child's qualities or innate capabilities. So I think the one piece of advice is, whatever your interest is, please pursue that. And the other thing that he mentioned to me was, he said the only other piece of advice I've given my daughter is, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of singularity or artificial intelligence, but the singularity is the day where artificial intelligence overtakes human intelligence. A lot of people think that's never going to happen. A lot of people think it's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. No matter what, the gap or this area that spans between artificial intelligence and human intelligence will always be relevant. So cognitive sciences is an area that you should do, whether you do genetics, whether you do physics, you do engineering. That's maybe an area that you should all pursue with it, what your interests are. So with those two anecdotes, let me start by saying the original topic that Jamshed assigned to me was technology and leadership. I'm going to talk about that in the anecdotes, but frankly, what I wanted to share with you was more my learnings over the last 25 odd years of professional experience and 50 odd years of my existence on earth. Most of these are probably things I've read in books or seen somewhere. I may attribute some of them to the people. Some I actually don't even remember where I picked them up. But those are lessons that I hold very dear. Those are lessons that I believe have held me in very good stead in whatever I have pursued. And those are lessons that I would like to share with you today to help you and guide you and inspire you in some small way, hopefully. So, okay, what am I doing wrong? Yeah. So the flow is that we're just going to talk about what has happened to management. We're going to talk about what I call stakeholder engagement. And I come from a sort of a public policy background. So when I flash that slide, everyone says, oh, that's when you talk to government, and that's not true. So everyone other than you is your stakeholder, and I'll mention more about that. Some tips on how to manage your careers. As I said, I have the unusual privilege of having been on my 4th career. So you could say I'm singularly unsuccessful in managing my career. But then again, you could argue that the fact that I've been able to change 4 times means that I may have picked up a few skills. And I'll close the session with a couple of thoughts on leadership that I think you might find useful. So, the Harvard Business School, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is probably one of the leading authorities of strategy and business management in the world. They partnered with something called the Leadership Institute that again trains and guides leaders. And in 2013, they said, well, we have a question. What makes the best leader? Or what qualities should a good leader have? And they invited experts from all over the world in different fields in academia, and they all sat down and deliberated over 2 or 3 days to say, what should a great leader look like, feel like, behave like? These were some of the, there was different points of views across the board, but these were some of the common things that started to emerge. They said, the perfect leader is someone who collaborates a lot. It's someone who uses soft power charm and charisma, displays empathy, as a unique style, etc., etc. I think all familiar to most of you. They then said, okay, well, let's just look at, given that these are the qualities we've identified, makes a good leader or a perfect leader, they said, well, let's look at leaders today in the world of sports and business and in academia and see if there is someone who perfectly symbolizes these qualities. And the result was suspense. That's a karibota. No, that's a joke, guys. But seriously, the point is, what defines leadership? How do you influence stakeholders? And how do you manage your career? So let's just look at some of the things that, that will help you do that. So this time, a much more serious study. McKinsey, as I think Hassan also mentioned, is one of the leading authorities on business thinking. And they run a magazine called the McKinsey Quarterly, where they discuss issues around leadership and management. And in 2014 was the 50th anniversary of the magazine. So again, they got about 13, they went to 13 countries, and they talked to people from 10 different walks of life, again, politics, industry, and they said, where is management coming from and where is it going? And how do we cope with the change that is happening? There were numerous, we're talking people who've devoted their lives and written PhDs or written books on the subject. So I'm not going to bore you with the detail. You could probably Google the McKinsey Quarterly Anniversary and look at what specific they had. But the two things that really came out in that discussion of these business leaders, academic leaders, sportsmen, doctors, engineers, was that management has gone through a fundamental change. And the change is that the original manager, the word manager, and the original manager was basically created to manage machine operators. So the word manager comes from somebody who manages, at the time, other people who were machine operators doing a task again and again. And the fundamental change over management over the last few years has been that the next age of managers, their work of managing the machine operators is now automated, and it's run through algorithms. I've had the privilege of spending some time in Hong Kong, and I was reading the newspaper, I think this was 2015, and I came across an interesting story, and this is actually a true story. There's a company called DeepMind Ventures in Hong Kong. It's a registered, publicly listed company. And in 2015, they appointed a new director to their board, somebody called Mr. Vital. Mr. Vital is a board director and has a vote on all the investment decisions the company makes. Mr. Vital is not a human being, it's an algorithm. So in addition to human directors, they have an algorithm that sits on the board of a publicly listed company and has a say in whether this is a good investment or a bad investment. And therefore, the role of manager can no longer be with artificial intelligence, and this is the point that I was making at the start. That work can be done much better now through algorithms. People don't need managers. However, so don't be scared, you still have jobs or opportunities. What the study found, what this group of experts came to was that people are still better at doing two things. One is that they can motivate their teams, and I think Hassan shared a brilliant example of how when he turned up at CCI, there was a culture, but it needed to change, and they motivated their teams, and you saw some of the pictures, and I'm sure George will refer to, he's been doing that all his life. So motivating people, motivating their teams. I don't know of any computer that can inspire me or motivate me to do better. It's always been human beings. And the second thing that humans still continue to do better, despite what you might think, is producing game-changing thoughts. Artificial intelligence is developing and may develop to a point where it starts to give ideas better than human beings. At this point in time, human beings are the ones coming up with the ideas that are then augmented by computers and artificial intelligence. So as of today, these two things still need to be performed by human beings, by you. So we've kind of looked at where management is going. We kind of see the trends that are coming up. The question then becomes, well, Ali, thank you for depressing us and telling us that we may not have too many jobs ahead of us, or we may have to switch careers. But how do I navigate this? So, you've now set the scene. What do I need to do to make sure that I turn out successful at the end of this process? I think this starts basically with an honest assessment of who you are as an individual. Again, when I was entering the professional workforce, there was a very dominant view that every profession, every organization, every line of work had its own kind of, just say Urdu mein kehte hain farma. You had to be like that person to succeed in that particular organization or that particular industry. And if you did not conform to those rules, you may not be as successful. I actually think that's kind of been turned over its head. And back to my point about whatever it is that interests you, life's now becoming so complex and so fast-paced that it's very important that you do an honest self-assessment of who you are, what drives you, what are your strengths and gaps. And again, it's probably cliched. I'm sure a lot of your parents, your professors have said, if you can identify what your areas of weaknesses are and build on that, you would be very successful. The problem is, the area of weakness is an area of weakness for a very good reason. You're not good at it. So it's very easy for someone to say, that's an area of weakness or a gap, why don't you improve that? And the reason why you would probably struggle to do well in that is because it does not interest you. So when I say that you need to work on your areas of improvement, I kind of caveat that with saying that make sure that it's an improvement that you want to do and you enjoy doing. If it is something that you don't enjoy doing and it's a gap, as long as you're aware that it's a gap, is probably enough. It's marginal returns. You should not be wasting time and energy and effort on something that you don't enjoy doing and that you're not good at. Chances are it'll take you a very long time to succeed there. And I think the last piece of advice before you start off on the self-appraisal journey is don't pretend. People are now becoming very smart. The transparency with the internet, with so much happening, you cannot pretend to be someone you are not. You will be found out. And when you are found out, it will be disadvantageous to you. So again, an honest appraisal of who you are, what are your strengths, and then believe me, there is enough space, if you're passionate about it, to create space for yourselves. You may have heard of a gentleman called Socrates, and I love this quote because Socrates was a Greek philosopher, and somebody said, asked Plato, one of his disciples, do you know who the wisest man in the world is? And they said, well, so they went to Socrates and said, people say you're the wisest man in the world. So do you know the answer to every question then, if you're the wisest man in the world? And Socrates responded that if you know the answer to every question put to you, you haven't asked the right questions. So no one knows everything. No one will ever know everything. You got to pick what you're good at. You got to pick what you're passionate about and pursue that. Okay, so once you've done an honest self-appraisal of who you are as an individual, you're very clear what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, This is that bit about stakeholder management a lot of people miss. And I think this is a very important step in making sure you're a successful manager, you're a successful leader. And the step people miss is that once they're very clear of who they are as an individual, they have an objective, they have a mission, they have they've identified a goal that they're trying to reach, and they throw themselves into that. And they try and work very hard, they're working 20 hours a day, they're doing everything in their capacity to do that, but they're not succeeding. And it frustrates them, it angers them, because they mean well, their heart is in the right place, they're doing all the work, they've done all the degrees, they've done all the qualifications, and yet they're not succeeding. And the reason why managers do not succeed, despite the best intentions, despite the best efforts, is because they do not manage their stakeholders well. Again, no individual, no person, no man or woman is an island. In organizations, you need other people's support much more than if you were an entrepreneur running your own business. Even there, you need the support of the people who are working with you. But in an organization, you cannot achieve anything on your own. And again, I think Hassan shared the example where all 1,500 of the Coke employees are going to be done through that immersion course. It's not just enough to say, oh, the leadership team and the CEO can do it, and the middle management can do it, the rest of the people can just follow. It's very easy. They don't need to think about it. That's not how it works. Every individual is unique, and every individual can contribute in some capacity. But you need to know what the strengths, gaps of those individuals are, and you need to manage them. And I think the only point that in my diverse experience I've learned is very successful is if you know what your issue is, if you know what your mission is, create a community around it. Get people who are like-minded, who can support you around in that issue. And there may not be people in your team, there may not be people in your organization, but there are people who probably think the same way about that particular issue and are willing to support you. And again, an organization that, I'll share another anecdote, a personal one, an organization that Ikti and Hassan and myself belong to, including Jamshed. I joined as a lateral entrant, and the culture in that organization was very different. You had to have grown up from the bottom in the organization to succeed. So it was a little tough for me, I have to say. And one particular day in a meeting, I was very frustrated. I went back home and I was very upset, and I told my wife that, I don't understand why this group is against me, or why they're not willing to support me. And she said, well, why don't you talk to your mentor, who was one of my bosses in the organization. So I went to him and I said, I don't understand why these people are against me. I've done them no harm. I'm trying to do my best, and yet every single step of the way they oppose me. And he closed the door and he sat me down and he started smiling. And he said, I've been watching you struggle for a while, and I was wondering when you will come and ask for help. So thank you for doing that. Now let me help you. So he guided me through it, and I'm not going to bore you with the details. The one thing he ended up telling me, which was very useful again, a very useful lesson in life, was he said, Ali, do not worry about trying to convince everyone of your mission. There will always be people who will be against you. There will always be people who refuse to accept your point of view. You just need to manage them. You don't need to convert them. So don't, again, to that point, with minimal energy in your careers, manage the ecosystem whereby if you know someone is going to take an adversarial point of view, manage it. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to turn them around so they become supporters. And I think that was probably one of the more important lessons I picked up in my careers that has served me very well. So, how does one manage one's career? 3 simple thoughts that I have used successfully and I have seen others use successfully. Number 1, be bold. Organizations today do not have the luxury of time and space to give you time to stand up and be counted. With technological speed, with our complexity in our lives, if there is something you want to get off your chest, say or do, please make a stand for it. Most organizations, there's still a few who might begrudge you that, most organizations and most leaders and bosses will support that. The second lesson is be confident. Once you have done that assessment that I talked about, once you have looked at that list of stakeholders and then managed the game plan, be very confident in yourselves, in your mission, in your goals. That's the only way to succeed. And last but not least is drive some excitement. You know, again, one of the reasons why I own my fourth career is that the day I wake up in the morning and I say to myself in the mirror in the morning, do I have to go to work again today? Is the day that I start planning for my next career. You have to enjoy your work. It is no longer enough to just get a salary. It's no longer enough just to look after your family and kids. It's very important that you enjoy the work that you do. And you need to be excited about it. And not only do you need to be excited about it, when you're in the workplace, try and drive some excitement and inspire people. And believe me, you'll be the beneficiaries of that. So similar to career management, a few words on leadership. And the one conclusion that I've come to in my 25 years of professional experience is that the best leaders are those who mimic life. Leadership is like life. Whatever helps you succeed in life will help you succeed in becoming a good leader. That's what I have learned. One of the hallmarks of that is honesty. A leader that does not speak or exhibit the truth, or in management lingo, walk the talk, is not a leader. And you will be unsuccessful if you continue to use pretend duplicity. Second is adaptability. Things are changing, guys. We talked about technology. We talked about, even if technology was not the case, the only constant, I think George was reminding us, is change. You talked about, a colleague in the audience talked about the sustainability of change. The only thing sustainable is change. There is no such thing as sustainability of change. So you have to be adaptable, because with change, you have to evolve and grow. If you think that you have tried something and it has worked successfully 3 years before, oh, that's easy, same situation, I'm going to use the same formula and I'll succeed. Chances are you may succeed, but not as much. And if you do it another 3 years down the road, chances are you may not succeed at all. So it's very important to be adaptable. And the last one, and this is probably the hallmark that I have kept closest to my life, is that whatever you do, do it with passion. Do not just go through the motions. Mediocrity is probably the worst thing an individual can do to themselves. So whatever your passion is, whatever it is that you're doing, make sure you do it at the end of the day with passion. My last couple of slides, a parting thought, and I came across this recently. I thought this was a very, very powerful idea, and I want to share it with you because I use it a lot. Have you heard of a gentleman called Jeff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn? So Jeff was being interviewed by a journalist, and it's on, again, YouTube, and you can Google it. And the journalist asked him this question. He said, "What is the secret of your success?" Jeff said 2 words, right decisions. Journalist said, "How do you make the right decisions?" 1 word, experience. Journalist said, "How do you get experience?" 2 words, wrong decisions. So guys, you have to be not afraid of failing. You have to be, so Michael Jordan, probably my favorite sports person. Don't be afraid to fail, be afraid not to try. Please, this is one of the biggest fallacies or things we've convinced ourselves is that you cannot fail in the corporate world because you'll be demoted or you'll be kicked out or you'll be fired. Believe me, I can tell you in my years of experience, that's the one thing you should try and do. I have never ever been faulted for or reprimanded for failure, as long as I failed fast and I learned from it and I grew from it. We don't do enough of that in our daily lives because it's socially not acceptable, because what will people say? Oh, I can't look bad, I'm such a competent manager, how can I make this basic mistake? As you're starting off in your lives and careers, this is the one principle that I think you should hold dear in your lives. Obviously do it in a manner that doesn't get you fired, but please do not be afraid to fail and fail fast. Thank you. Happy to take questions, or if there are none. Looks like I was very convincing or very boring. Either ways, I'm here if there are any other questions afterwards.
Assalamu sir. So in start you talk a bit about a career assistance. So sir, career counseling, is the main topic in our society, and since last history in Pakistan, it's not getting serious. So day by day, students are not getting serious by their studies and they are not interested in what field they are. So how you think about what importance should be giving in Pakistan for the career assistance, as no one students will have the same background support like you, as you told about. So what do you think about it?
No, so I think you're absolutely correct. Unfortunately, counseling, whether it's for career or whether it's for students who are having issues in their academic lives, is not given the same importance in Pakistan, unfortunately, that it is given in other cultures. And I've seen a lot of people turn around simply because they got the right advice at the right time, not because they were doing anything wrong. Some people and organizations are doing it better than others. I think occasions like this, where you come, you get exposed to different ideas, is probably a good start. The other thing I would say is an invention called the internet, where frankly everything is available at the click of a mouse button. So read a lot, ask different questions. Hazrat Google alayhi salam, aapko pata hai aajkal sab cheezon ka jawab de sakte hain. So educate yourselves, find ways to ask questions and meet people. Again, I'm sure the culture at NAS is no different to others, is, people, professors who have influenced you and impressed you, go up to them, seek their support and guidance. Even though it's not formal counseling, you will get a sentence or two that will be useful.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, allow me to appreciate your wonderful talk here and other speakers over here. It was very enlightening for us to hear, especially at the stage that we are. I have a question. Recently, I'm in my junior year engineering, the technical field here, and I've been thinking whether, given the experience that you have, and we're all seated here, do you agree to the fact that the academic and the career turmoil that all of us as youth of Pakistan are facing and youth elsewhere are facing is because that we're trained to be a jack of all trades from the start and not exceed at just one thing, like you said, like you mentioned, that we have to find a passion and then we have to pursue it. Currently, this is an experience of 2.5 years of my bachelor's, that 99% of whoever I am with, even myself, am not satisfied with what I'm doing. And we believe that our careers is the final one that we're doing over here. Like you said, you've changed 4 careers. It was surprising to me as well. So do you think it's because we're inculcated with the spirit of becoming a jack of all trades from the very start in our society, in our culture, that it brings us to this state of turmoil at a later stage where we don't know what to do because we can't find our own passion because we're made to do so many other things and we're made to exceed at so many things.
Sure. No, thank you for that question. Actually, there are two different things to that. I think Pakistani culture generally, especially when it comes to education, is very risk averse. So, you actually said two contradictory things. One is the fact that our education system does encourage us to be jack of all trades. Kids from a very early age are meant to do mathematics and sciences and arts, which personally I don't think is a bad thing. The difference, however, is that there is no filtering process to decide which child should go where. Rather, it is a function of the numbers you score in your matriculation or O levels that determines whether you'll go to medical school or engineering school or do a BA or end up in a vocational institute. I think that's what's wrong. A general education, I personally believe, is very important because, as I mentioned, the future is with the cognitive sciences. If you've only done physics all your life, you do not understand and appreciate politics, arts, history, society. So I think being a jack of all trades is not necessarily a bad thing. The difference is that at some point in our lives, somebody needs to help us make that decision of what your interest is, whether it's the arts or sciences or you're good with your hands or you write poetry or whatever it is. And then you need to be guided, coached, and educated in that particular stream. That, unfortunately, does not happen in Pakistan. I think to the point about specialization, specialization is good. It's not a bad thing, as long as it is an area that you're interested in. You can specialize in the nth degree in a medical profession, but if you don't enjoy doing that, you will never be great at it. You might be good at it, you'll never be great at it. So I think that's very important that you choose, and there's no easy way to convince parents and colleagues and professors that you need to do your calling. But I think, again, the awareness at the level of children now is much more. The internet, through the exposure, हम जब छोटे थे तो बैठ जाओ खड़े हो जाओ. That's no longer the case with, I think, the youth of today. You can think, act, behave quite independently, and I would encourage you to pursue that. Thank you. I think I'm standing between you and tea, so